Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. We're here to facilitate inspiring dialogues about the nature of consciousness across disciplines, communities, and practitioners, all with a holistic perspective.
From energy healing to somatic therapies, from neuroscience to meditation, we believe the most interesting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines.
I'm Christabel.
And I'm Keith.
Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. Today we have with us as guest Richard Shankman. Richard Shankman has been a meditator since 1970 and teaches at Dharma centers and groups internationally. He is the guiding teacher of the Metta-Dharma Foundation and co-founder of the Sati Center for Buddhist Studies and of Mindful Schools. He practices and teaches meditation that integrates compassion, mindfulness, concentration, and insight as one path of practice. Richard is the author of The Experience of Samadhi, an in-depth exploration of Buddhist meditation, published in 2008, and The Art and Skill of Buddhist Meditation, published in 2015. So great to have you here with us today, Richard. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
This may sound general as an opener, but given your extensive background as a meditation teacher, we wanted to open with a simple but very particular question. Why exactly should people meditate?
Well, that people have to find their own way. It's not for me to say why, or really for anyone to say why. I think everyone's got, well, first of all, people who are meditating, there's a wide range of reasons why people want to get out of meditation, and it's all valid. So I don't put any hierarchy or any ways better than anything. We all want to just find our own way. And I think it would be arrogant or hubris, you could say, for any of us to tell anyone what their own goals and intentions should be. I will just add that I hope if people are drawn to meditation or any kind of self-development practices, consciousness raising, you could say spiritual practices, whatever term you like, I hope people will consider some of the various teachings. For example, I come out of a Buddhist tradition, and just hear what those teachings have to say and see, do those resonate, do those help inform the choices we make? And then we all have to make our own choice and find our way. And I'll just say one more thing. I'm very much, in the way I teach and work with people, I very much want to find what people are up to and then support them in that. As long as they're not causing harm to themselves and others, and they're trying to live in a way that's more kind and loving and empathetic and wise and all of those things, then I want to support them in that. And then it's a question of just what will support each person, and it's not one way. So I guess that's what I would say on that.
Thank you. So you, as you mentioned, you're a Buddhist meditation teacher, if that's fair to use the phrase, steeped primarily in the Theravadan tradition. Maybe you can inform our listeners in brief about what differentiates Theravadan from other Buddhist lineages.
Right. I will say that, but one thing I have to say, I'm hesitant to say this, but I've already opened my mouth, so I'm going to have to say this. So as a preface, I was definitely in the Theravada Buddhist lineage. That was my path for many decades, and I was very steeped in that, and it's been a powerful tradition that I still use as a form and a structure. But with all traditions, as these practices become more alive, it shifts. And the forms and the structures which served us very well, and I'm very respectful of, and as I said, I still use, tend to drop away as the actual lived experiential aliveness. What would you say? The present moment of awareness, of wakefulness, of just consciousness, of actual just the experience of being comes alive. There's no real Buddhism in there anymore. So I would, I actually have not gone around and said this to people. I'm a little hesitant because I'm not actively busy not being a Buddhist. I don't need to say that to people and everything, but I actually don't identify as a Buddhist anymore. But I still respect that path because it was my path. And so now I'm just more, I'll answer your question if you still want me to, given what I said. But I'm really interested is what actually brings the awakening alive. And, I don't know that Buddhism has the monopoly on that. I used to think that. When I knew the least, I was more opinionated. And as I've learned more over the years, a lot of my opinions about that have dropped away. Do you still want me to answer about Theravada?
I'm not going to impose the question on you.
Okay. I don't mind answering that question, but I think, so again, I want to follow where, I don't want to take over the direction that you want to go, but my real answer is that I will say this, in the Theravada source texts, which are in the Pali language, called the suttas, there's actually a sutta on the simile of the raft. And even there it says all of this practice in Dharma is meant for crossing over. And they use this image of this body of water, and we're crossing over to some other shore, which is a refuge, if you will, a more durable, deep place of liberation and freedom. And they said, if you built a raft, it's a famous simile and to use it to, once you've gotten to the other shore, would it make any sense to put that raft on your back and keep carrying it around with you as you walked around? And of course, you would not do that. So I don't mean, I want to be very careful here. I'm not making any claims at all. And you certainly don't want to jump out of the raft too early while you're still in the middle of the water. But I think it's something that many people do experience, that at some point, again, what really becomes more of our guide is our own inner guidance, our own inner teacher, if you will. I use that phrase a lot, comes more alive. It's not so much an ego thing like, oh, I know everything. No, it's not that. But it's something, we learn to distinguish between sort of our delusion and really something more profound in us that we can rely on. And as we come to know that more, that really becomes the path and the guide. And then once again, a lot of the forms drop away. So it's kind of like that.
Thanks, Richard. You speak of this inner guide, this inner compass, and really the process of establishing a connection to that and uncovering it. Would you say that meditation has been the primary method in which you have made that connection? And what was it that turned your attention to meditation in the first place from your personal experience?
Yes. Yeah. Well, there are two questions you asked there. One is, do I think meditation has been sort of the primary path for me, and also what brought me to it? So I'll say what brought me to it first. Well, I began, it's been 52 years, so that's a while. In 1970, I began my meditation practice. And I don't know why I was back in, it was a certain time, and people were doing a lot of psychedelic drugs, for example, and Eastern religions were coming, that hadn't been around, all these things. Ram Dass, I think he came out with Be Here Now in like 72. I was in that scene, as many people of my generation were. And I was doing a lot of I was having some of the experiences that Ram Dass was talking about, using different substances and things. And so actually I'd started meditating a couple of years before that book came out, and when that book came, it was very, very influential. He was I've actually have met him and hung around with him some in the early days a little bit. And so that's, I guess I was just naturally drawn to it. It's hard to say what. Definitely for me, the meditation practice has been sort of central to everything. Obviously there's a lot of teachings and around ethical behavior and wisdom practices and insight, and a lot of those Theravada teachings have been foundational for sure. But to me, it really came out of the meditation practice. I've practiced, I don't know if you're going to get into this at some point, but where I've put a lot of emphasis on what this word samadhi, which is the concentration side, and I found that it's brought things very alive. And then I just sort of followed the aliveness. It's like an organic unfolding that you naturally want to follow and keep following. So I've always put a lot into I know some people don't do that much actual formal meditation, or it can be hard, to keep up a practice. But for me, I've always, for all these years, actually put a lot into. I still to this day, have a strong daily practice, and it keeps still unfolding in amazing ways. So. For me, but who's to say? It's actually interesting because when I look back over my life, I mean, I've gone through periods of being in psychotherapy, for example, that I found very useful. So that, it's everything contributes together, but I think the actual meditation practice for me has been, let's just say, invaluable, and I've been pleased with the results. Again, I'm not making any grand claims. I think many people find that these things are true for them.
Thanks, Richard. You mentioned the word samadhi, and you're author of a book called The Experience of Samadhi. There really isn't a lot of contemporary literature where authors are focusing on this. There's not a massive amount of it. It's surprisingly small in a sense. So we'd love to give our listeners a sense of, what is samadhi, jhana, another associated word. What are we talking about here when you use that phrase?
Yeah. Well, so this is a big topic, and I won't try to do it all, but you can maybe want to guide how we go. But this jhana, I'll just say, are specific meditative states of samadhi. They're defined in a certain way. But the word samadhi actually, it just means undistracted. And it gets translated into English as concentration. If you hear people say concentration and meditation, that's what they're referring to. I don't like that word. I mean, we're stuck with it because everyone uses it. So I haven't been very successful in trying to change the use of that. I think undistracted is a better word because the term concentration has a lot of different connotations and can manifest in many different ways, which we can talk about. But the basic idea is it's having the mind settle, become more, it manifests in so many ways. But when we say undistracted, even that word undistracted can manifest in a lot of ways. We can be undistracted when we're concentrated in a very narrow kind of way, like there's even a word called one-pointed. You're not literally on a point, but just on one thing. And the mind doesn't wander and other awarenesses don't come up because your ability to concentrate is so well developed. But also there's an undistracted where it's not narrow, where you can have quite a broad, open awareness, very inclusive, but the mind itself has come to a real stillness to receive it all. And it's resting back in many different terms are used, in just resting in a broad awareness or consciousness or something like that. So it manifests in many ways. This is part of the challenge of working with people, because it's everybody's different and it's not just one way. So, but it's basically the steadying of the mind to be undistracted, clear, present, and awake. And then there's a whole lot to talk about of what kind of things that can happen, because it turns out one way I'll just say one more piece and then I'll pause. I like to think of it, there's two images that I think both work. One is like making your mind like a Hubble telescope, very vast and powerful. But it can also feel quite the opposite, like making your mind an electron microscope. And they both are kind of opposite ends, but it can feel one way or the other, or you can consciously steer it. But it's the power of the mind to get underneath the ordinary, everyday surface appearance of things, to really open up to things that are already here, but are kind of tend to get covered over and that we don't have connection with. So it's kind of like that. It's a huge topic. I mean, really talking about samadhi could be, and I do classes like this sometimes where we'll spend many weeks meeting and talking and exploring. It's a big topic. I'm glad you guys are exploring it. That's really great.
I think for our listeners, there's been a couple times that the bell has gone off there, and I think it's always an interesting phrases that you've said. So maybe there's something to the synchronicity there. Many people, people in Buddhism might be particularly familiar with the word jhana, or at least I'm sure that many people familiar with yoga are going to be very familiar with the word samadhi, because in the traditional 8 limbs of yoga, samadhi is the eighth limb, right? Now, then there's this other word, jhana, which is very particular within the Buddhist tradition and describes very specific states. Can you go into the movement from samadhi specifically into jhana and the Buddhist orientation to that word?
Yes, I could say a little bit. So I know some about it from the yoga, the Ashtanga yoga and kind of that tradition. And I used to practice in my first early years. I was actually in that tradition. I lived in an ashram for a few years, and I was in that until I think around the mid 70s. I transitioned into the Buddhist world, so I know a little bit. And but so I want to be careful about comparing it. Let me just say this: I've had a number of discussions with people who are more in the traditional yogic traditions. I think. I think I should. I'm realizing I want to be a little careful and not try to say what they think. I just don't think that's necessarily useful. But I'll just say from where I'm coming from. By the way, I validate all of and appreciate all these different understandings of samadhi. But the word jhana. So what happened? Let me just back up, if I may. What happens is when the mind starts to settle and get concentrated, we start to have certain experiences of what, how is it we know we're sort of dropping deeper into the meditation? What is the experience? I call that those are the experiences of samadhi. Actually, that was the title of my book that you mentioned. And it manifests, it's like I said earlier, it's highly individual what starts to happen. But most people will start to feel you'll just feel, you won't be wondering. I mean, it'll be palpable, it will be strong, calm, steadiness, peace. You'll notice that the mind is settled. It gets less distracted. It's not jumping around all over the place. Not that it can never wander off, but it gets less as it starts to steady. Some people feel very expansive, whether it's their body can feel expansive or maybe it's more mental. It's hard to know where it's located. People can start to have energies move in the body. Or sometimes it's, again, you don't know where it might be more mental, not clear where it's located. And those can be very smooth and light, or they can be very dramatic. Those energies can be pleasant or unpleasant. This, again, is a big topic. Some people will see lights. Most don't, but some do. Some people will hear sounds, like it'll sound like celestial sounds or something like that. When that happens, it's really wonderful. It's very pleasant. Not most people don't, but some do. There's many manifestations that start to happen. And so jhana starts to then map out and describe a pathway. It's not the only pathway, but it's a description of certain of these samadhi states when they get pretty strong. And so it's a map. This is a big area of controversy in the Buddhist world because jhana is described in the old Pali texts. In the suttas, there's a definition there. It's a standard definition. And by definition, anything that matches those words, that's jhana. But the words are so vague that they could be legitimately understood. They can map onto many different experiences. So there's a lot of different meditative states that people will call jhana, legitimately, because they match the words. I suspect that back in the earliest days, the early people around the Buddha had a shared understanding of what they meant. But a lot of the terms in there are not defined. They're just like there's this term piti, which is people translate as bliss, for example, rapture. The early texts, the suttas, never defined piti, not one single time. They just used the term. Later, hundreds of years later, there was this text like the Visuddhimagga, if people know that text, and it defined it specifically. That was their understanding centuries later. But so my point is that jhana is, if you want to get, I can give you my definition of it more specifically, but it's a roadmap of when you really start to get very strong samadhi, both the degree at which the mind is undistracted and a lot of the manifestations that can happen around energetic things. But you definitely get a tremendous clarity of mind.
That's really helpful, Richard. Thank you. I'd love to track back a little bit. I loved your phrase that you were using with regards to samadhi, the idea of following the aliveness. I'd just like to help relate for our listeners, because we're talking about some quite lofty principles here and ideas that are experientially based rather than intellectual. That's an important point to make. So I'm just intrigued as to, you've worked with a lot of students, I understand, and I'm intrigued as to if you have any advice as for those who'd like to establish and maintain a meditation practice, who maybe have aspiration, interest in connecting to these states, how to go about that if that's their choice.
So we want to the best we can. I use this phrase a lot. I'm not that conscious of it, but people point out I tend to use this phrase, doing the best we can. But it's so important. So one of the things that I encourage people is to do the best they can to let go of their critical judging mind. You want to have judging in the sense of discernment. That's a kind of judging, but there's a wisdom to it. When I like to use the word discernment, when I use the word judging, I'm more differentiating the negative, unhelpful, suffering-generating kind of judging. So you want to come, and really what we do is we have to start. I mean, it's such a cliche, but it's so true. We have to start where we're at. And so, I'll just, and then you find some practice, technique, method, system that you feel drawn to. And you don't know if you're a beginner, right? So and it can be in different traditions, different teachers, different styles. And if you're drawn to something, you try it out and you see, and what's the result you're getting? Does it feel like it's working for you? There's a whole lot of things about, finding a teacher and how one does that, or a teaching or a practice. Maybe you get a book, or somebody tells you, or a friend brings you down to some meditation center, who knows? But you somehow or other find a practice. It's a huge world because there's all these kind of meditations called mindfulness meditation. It's a big, big world. What's that? Is that the same as concentration meditation? There's all these practices called insight meditation, kindness, love, this word metta you'll hear, compassion practices. It's a huge world. So you start with something. And I don't know if you want to get into that, because the whole thing, like, what's mindfulness? Does that work with concentration, with insight? I think they all come together and you can't separate them out, but it's not always taught that way. And then you start doing the practice. And then you have to have patience, because for most people, it takes time to start feeling yourself settle more, feeling like, oh, something's happening, right? And you have those first aha experiences. Well, that's kind of a funny way to speak about it, because something's always happening, right? Even if you can't concentrate at all, you're still sitting trying to be present with yourself, which can be challenging, right? Just to sit quietly with oneself when the mind won't settle down, that can be tough. In fact, one of the hardest things is in the beginning, just when you need the support of the samadhi the most to sit with your crazy, out of control mind, you have it the least. So the hardest part is getting going. Once you start dropping in, it feels great. You want to keep going. And then there's a whole thing of how it opens and how we follow it. So you stick with something for a while. Don't be too quick to jump off that train. I don't know what a while is. You just choose. A few sits, a few weeks, a few days, a few months, a few years, I don't know. And then you might find something else you hear about or you read about. Maybe you stick with what you're doing and go, well, I don't know about this, but oh, that seems interesting. There's some degree of experimentation if you don't know. When I work with people, if you find someone you can work with, well, then hopefully the person's had some experience to help. When I start working with people, I don't come with a one-size-fits-all. I actually don't know what to tell them to do, because I want to meet them and we actually do an exploration, and through our discussion, everyone can find a practice that will work for them. Everyone. But sometimes it's helpful from the outside to have someone give us a little outside feedback. And then we can help get a pretty good idea of, I think this might really work for you, and help tune. And then they have to do the experiment and see. And even if it doesn't work, that's okay. It gives feedback. And we learn, and eventually you learn what works. And then you do the best you can to stick with the practice. Like anything, we need some regularity if you want to get good at something. That can be hard because life can pull us in many directions, even if you're not off on some retreat, you're doing daily life practice, whatever. And you stick with your practice, and then the last piece to the answer is that it's so easy to judge our practice by how we think it's supposed to be. And way more important, because there's no such thing as a good or bad meditation. I mean, it literally does not exist. There's only what is actually happening in the present moment. And how do we work with it skillfully? And if we can hold that attitude, then we can be present for anything.
Yeah, absolutely, Richard. I just have one follow-up question with regards to that, with what you advise your students to do with what Keith and I might call with field dynamics, the sort of phenomenology of connecting into energy moving around the field. So when we're working with people, we're really asking them to do something akin to Vipassana. They're moving their conscious awareness through the body and from our model out into the energy field. And you talked about sensations of energy moving through, etc. From your positioning now and how you perceive things, how do you guide people to work with that? Is it to let it go, to follow it, to ignore it? I'm really intrigued.
Yeah. I use all of the above depending on what's happening for the person. So, first of all, these energies can arise on their own, and since you work with those, I know you do a lot of this energy kind of work, and I looked at your website, so I have a little bit of idea of what you do. By the way, I should say, even in the Samadhi world, we have people who are little groups, we don't talk about it much, who are doing some amazing kind of Samadhi healing stuff, who are very deep Samadhi practitioners. We're sort of hidden off in the corner so nobody knows. But because in the Buddhist world, the healing part doesn't get talked about that much, but it's actually can be very, very powerful, especially for people who've developed their Samadhi very strongly. So I have a lot of, I don't know everything that you're doing, but just from what I heard, I have a lot of appreciation for that kind of work. So I would say there's two things. One is, when is it appropriate to direct our attention to cultivating certain energies, or to go into them or connect with them, move them, work with them in different ways? And when is the time when we're not directing, but we're more just being present to what arises and just knowing what's the best way to work with what comes to us? And that's different than directing and trying to cultivate. I know that's a general answer, but I think both of those are important. And again, when I work with people, I use my best intuition and my best just experience, and because sometimes I will encourage people one way or the other. I really am, in general, I want to be careful. I don't know if I'd say no limits, but let me just say no limits about what the practice, the form it's supposed to take, or how we're supposed to direct our attention, or whatever. We have to look and see, as we follow the natural sort of the organicity of how things unfold and the way starts to open, hopefully we can kind of weave our way through along this path on what serves us. But we want to know where we want to head for sure. So I do have a sense of where I'd like to get people to head. How we get there, though, it's all over the place, right? I'm imagining, I don't know if this is true, but when you're working with people in these different energies, it's not just one way either, right? Depends on what's happening, and you have to have a wide range of approaches, right? So it's probably similar.
Indeed, and you mentioned the word healing. Very often in Eastern tradition, including the Buddhist, we see this word purification. And I'm wondering, do you think that those words are same, healing and purification? Or if not, is there a difference?
That's an interesting question. I haven't really reflected on that. I guess what comes to, at first I was about to say to you, I tend to think of them differently. Generally when I think of healing, it's like in the traditional way we tend to think. Like in our group, we've had people who've had like very advanced cancer or deep emotional, all kinds of stuff, right? And that's kind of the way you think of the word healing. And purification, the way I use it, is it's a big piece of this practice that I don't know if it gets talked about that much. Maybe it does, but I don't hear it that much of it in my book tradition. in Theravada Buddhism, but there's something called purification of mind. And it really is a disentangling, or you could say a reordering of neural pathways or conditioned patterns, if you want to say that way, so that a lot of our, let's just say, unhelpful or unwholesome would be traditional language, reactive patterns tend to get reorganized in a way that even if we lose our mindfulness and we're just unconscious, it naturally arises just in a good way. So that's more of a purification. However, as I'm saying that, I realize that those two, you can't, you really can't separate them out, because it's all connected, right? So what you do in the body, if there, let's just say someone has trauma in their nervous system and you do something that, you think of it as a physiological thing, but it's connected with purification of mind, it's connected with healing. If you heal or do purification, if you will, on challenging mental patterns, say, which you think might be psychological kind of work, or I don't know how people hold it, but a lot of those things, I can't prove this, so I could be wrong, but it really, to me, it's pretty clear, it's connected with a lot of the traditional maladies we deal with and ways that we suffer in the body and in the mind. So I still tend to use them in different ways, but in a way, it's all part of one whole thing. That's the way I think of it now that I'm reflecting on it.
Yeah. Because we have this time with you, I want to jump back into the jhanas, because it's so, there are few people who can really speak to it extensively. And I just feel like so few people understand what this is. Now, my personal experience was being obsessed with these jhana states and wanting to develop them. And I put in that time to do it and cultivated these states. And what struck me was there was language that described something. And then I said, okay, I'm really interested in those states, but I didn't experience them, right? But it's in the experiencing of them where there's the realization of things are not what they seem. These are the movements into extraordinary states of being, of consciousness, extremely non-ordinary, at least at first, extremely exotic and interesting for what it's worth. So why is this something, given that, and my understanding is this is basically the prescription directly from the traditional Buddhist teachings, is basically develop concentration, develop the jhana states, and with a laser-like kind of focus, you then apply it to a kind of more insight-based thing, more like understanding the nature of something. And I understand they can be coincidental practices, but that the jhana component is very important. Why is this so maybe not well understood, or why are so few people interested in cultivating these things, given that they have so much potency, so much realization and awakening behind them, and are also just fascinating?
Yeah. Well, so a few things there that you brought up. One is, why is it so misunderstood? You didn't say misunderstood, or kind of, when you go to the Vipassana, that's the insight meditation world, there's this thing of, concentration's okay, but don't do that for various reasons. But here's in coming out of Theravada Buddhism, this is what I'm saying is not in the old source text, but this text that came out many centuries later called the Visuddhimagga. I know that's a tongue twister name, but you'll hear it. And it was a treatise. It's not a commentary, but a treatise that pulled together the understanding maybe 600 or 800 years after the Buddha died. And it was different. And in that understanding, the idea is, so first of all, they separate out, we're separating out two things here. And this is just me. I don't know if other people speak this way. They'll have words like awakening, realization, enlightenment, and so that's all one thing. And then to me, there's this thing called liberation, and it's not the same thing. You can have enlightenment experiences come out and be just as foolish of a person as you were when you went in. Trust me on this. So, so that's a whole topic there about what do we mean by enlightenment, where's its place, or what do we mean by awakening, what do we mean by realization, self-realization, a lot of terms. So people use them in different ways. I think they're connected with when I use the term liberation, but in my mind, they're not the same thing. So the traditional Theravada is actually aiming towards something called liberation through non-clinging. That's a big topic. What do we mean? So the idea traditionally would be you would do practices called insight type practices. You would concentrate your mind so it gets powerful, like that telescope or electron microscope, so you can really perceive like impermanence, or how things are changing, or the nature of the self, or impermanence is one that's used a lot. And when the idea is, if you could really get insight into impermanence, say, and put your attention onto the fact that things are changing, that's kind of the impermanence, that if you really got it, then the mind would let go deeply around clinging to things, because you see there's nothing you can, you can try to cling to anything, but it doesn't work because things change, right? That's the idea of insight. So there's this idea that when Theravada sort of came and the Vipassana movement came to America, and people like Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, others, what I'm about to say, by the way, is controversial and it's a gross generalization, but I'll just put it out there. They actually studied with many different teachers, but they tended to bring a particular style of this Burmese teacher named Mahasi Sayadaw. So he was a big Visuddhimagga guy. And because of that, there's this idea, and also when they think of samadhi, they think of a particular kind of samadhi where you get one-pointed and you get so focused that you lose connection with changing experience. And if that were to happen, you can't do insight practice because you can't put your attention on change. So concentration's kind of bad, right? And you want to get enough concentration, but then turn to insight. That's kind of the history. However, there's a whole nother path that's big, even in the traditional countries, and this is more where I come from, where if you do the right kind of samadhi, the mind comes to stillness, but you actually don't disconnect from changing experience. It enhances your connection. And you can go as concentrated as you want. This was really more of the style of jhana that the first style was that Visuddhimagga jhana, but the second style is more like in the old suttas. And if you get that kind of jhana, you don't have to do a separate kind of practice called insight meditation. You just take the samadhi as far and deep as you want, and all the realizations, the liberations are just there as a result of being in such a clear place. So this liberation manifests in different ways. Can I just say one more thing on that? Yeah. Okay. So liberation is this non-clinging. Sometimes, so there's some people that few people, most people doesn't work this way for, but there are some people, you can see how this insight path came to be, because there are people for whom it's very powerful. And I directly work with people now who, as their samadhi grew, naturally just their awareness, their perception of change and how the mind is just creates suffering and assembles the sense of self and all this stuff was just in their awareness. And so it was more of an insight feel to their practice. But there's a lot of other people, I think probably most people, for whom you don't get those kind of insights. You go into a deep equanimity, wakeful presence. You're resting in sort of a boundless consciousness. Maybe it's like a boundless love for some people. I actually suspect that the boundless love and the boundless consciousness are the same, but I can't prove that. It gets subtle. I suspect that they're actually just the same thing, but it just kind of pops in your mind differently. And you're resting in these places that get sort of out of the individual self. And it may not have felt like you had any insights, but just through the samadhi, you're in a place of non-identification, non-clinging, and you really have connected with something much more vast and deep and profound. That's more of a real essence. This is not traditional Theravada language, but if you get a Theravada Buddhist monk on here, I'm happy to kick it around back and forth with them, because they'll say, there's no essence. But I think it's not true. It doesn't matter what the texts say. That's not the deathless, by the way. That's something different, if you want to get into that. But when you come back into existence, there's an essence. So that's a little teaser. I don't know if that's the direction you want to go. I shouldn't have said that, maybe. So The way I work with people, everyone that I've worked with who's gone deep in samadhi, it's immediately experientially obvious the benefits and how it leads to all the benefits of the insights come, the mindfulness come, the heart qualities come, the non-clinging, the letting go, the enlightenment, all of those things come for those for whom that's a path they're drawn to. However, that's not everybody's path. Some people may be on a pure insight path, pure mindfulness path. That's their way. So we each have to, again, find our own way. But I certainly find for many people the samadhi way, just you see for yourself how it shifts. Your whole really experience of being just transforms. Maybe you know that, doing the kind of work you're doing, we see this, right? When we sort of something very profound is revealed.
Thanks, Richard. In the model that we're looking at here, upon development of the fourth jhana, begins the attainment of these supernatural powers, if you will, the idis. And in the yogic tradition, we see the similar word with siddhi. We work with many people in the healing arts in which they're making use of these psychic faculties for the purpose of healing. What's your personal feeling on these skills or these ideas, or would you prefer or like to comment on their role in traditional Buddhist meditation training?
Yeah. Well, certainly in traditional Buddhist meditation training, so you call them siddhis. In the Pali, it's idhis. The siddhis, I guess, is more of the Sanskrit. So all that stuff's in there. In the traditional teachings, they're just mentioned as being in there, but aren't normally, they're states of consciousness or experiential places that are attainable, accessible, but not part of the path of liberation so much. It's not necessary. So there's probably a lot more that should be said to do justice to how it was in the tradition, but maybe just as a general comment. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. Practically speaking, I think those are powerful. We want to validate those. Sometimes teachers will tend to invalidate them. No, that's a distraction. That's a side. I think that's just a terrible mistake. Because first of all, it's invalidating what the actual opening experiences are like for that person who's having those experiences, like there's something they're not supposed to be having. It's not true. So there's a power there that can be turned towards healing. That, again, I mentioned it may not be exactly what you do, but that we have, like I said, I've got a little side group. There's only about a dozen of us, but it's people I happen to know who are very powerful samadhi practitioners, and so we just started doing this healing stuff. We kind of created our own thing, and we've seen it can be amazing, some of the stuff that's there. Again, not traditional Buddhist kind of uses that I'm aware of. There may be some, but we're just doing it. So I have a lot of appreciation. We have people who are opening up people like me can sort of channel energies in a certain way. There's other people are having a lot of psychic stuff and all kinds of stuff that are happening. I'm not one of those, but and so I have a lot of appreciation and respect and validate it. The only thing I would say that we try to be careful of is, you can have access to any kind of, you say, power, if you will, and it can be connected with sort of an ego sense of how, like, and that doesn't mean a bad, but even the sense of, oh, you're sick, I'm going to heal you, and I can personally be like beaming energy at them or something, right? So that's one thing. And I have to be a little careful. I don't really know, but that's kind of, we sort of, that just doesn't feel right to us. There's a different way where the ego part is, well, this word ego is a tricky word. So, but I'm just I hope you don't mind, where you still have yourself involved, but it's more of allowing yourself to be a channel and allowing what has to come through. So there is some sense of directing your attention in that way. So you're involving yourself. But it's different than just you zapping someone with what you think is healing energy. It's more taking something and then you don't know what's supposed to happen, because I don't know someone's karma. Maybe you don't use that term. Like, maybe it's not for them to get healed. And that may or may not have anything to do with how good or not we are as healers, right? So you just don't know. So you do your piece, and it's kind of a, I have found, maybe you have too, it's a, how should I say, it's kind of a tricky thing. It doesn't feel tricky when you're in it, but to think about it, like, what does it mean to get yourself, you have to put yourself in there, get yourself in a certain state of consciousness in this healing process that you're going to do. So you're engaging yourself, but at the same time, you're sort of stepping out of it and letting something more profound come. So you sort of have to be able to do both. And so I think that's my only caution in my mind, is about how much of it's an ego thing versus being a vehicle kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks, Richard. You've touched on two key points for us here at Field Dynamics, which is one, the very important principle that the healer doesn't heal, as it were. And the second being that it's incredibly important to get out of the way, and that's, really, really key principles.
Okay. Well, that's nice to hear about that. I mean, it sounds like you're doing some good, and you training people, right, who can do this work, right?
Yeah, very much at the edge of doing, non-doing, in a sense, to use the Taoist terminology, which is you're present, engaged, even with intent at times. But the deepest skill is the being aspect, which is an allowing aspect, and to essentially kind of be able to be on the seesaw of both at the same time. And certainly, though, the assignment is not at a personality, egoic level, but the ability to access that which is beyond that in oneself.
Yeah.
I can't help but follow up with, you said deathless versus essence, or you mentioned you said it's not the deathless, which is probably quite deep in there. And then you mentioned about essence, which I initially heard the way I translated what you said was something like, that's something that's actually manifest in a sense. That's the word that comes to mind. Would you correct me if I'm incorrect in that, but would you mind talking about these two things, the deathless versus this essence that you mentioned?
Yeah. As soon as that came out of my mouth, I kind of thought I shouldn't have done that, but okay, let me just go for it here. So the terminology, I'm using Theravada Buddhist terminology here. So there's what they talk about, the deathless. This would be when they use the word nirvana, that's the Sanskrit, or in the Pali it's nibbana. And this idea is, it's what they call the deathless. And I'm going to use some words, but it really literally is ineffable. It's beyond verbal conceptual categories. But when that happens, you can stand on the edge, you still exist, but kind of peer in. But when you've dissolved away into the deathless, you're not going into it. It's not nothing, but it's not something. The way Ram Dass said it once, there's nothing there, which is not exactly right. It's just the unmanifest. I call it pure eternity itself, but that's not really accurate, because it's not eternity like it lasts forever, but there's no space and there's no time. What's that? And you've actually dissolved away out of existence when that happens. Okay, I can keep kind of dancing around it, but that's that. Then when you come back into existence, you kind of can tell the tale. But so most of what I think a lot of traditions talk about is when we're still in the realm of existence. And then we say, well, what's the highest reality of that? And that's where you can talk about like pure consciousness. Well, this is what I meant when I said, it's not the deathless. We've kind of backed back. We still are in existence now. You can go beyond that to dissolve away. But if you exist, what's kind of the deepest truth of that? Again, I can't prove this, but from just experientially, what I would say, I really haven't gone around talking like this because I'm going to catch hell, but I'll just say, it seems that the universe, I don't know, is made of pure consciousness, the fabric of it, or maybe say made of love. Again, this is my own personal take. And I suspect that those are it's the same thing, but sometimes it just is, as a human being, and we're filtering these down, how it's experienced, the love side of the consciousness. That's the best I know to say about it. Someone else may come in and maybe they had a different take on it, right? So, and that's where we can come into these places where we can just rest, you can open up. This is more the enlightenment side. It's not necessarily the liberate. I mean, when you're in it, you're pretty liberated. But this is what I said earlier, there's liberation through non-clinging, which can be a very ordinary, everyday kind of thing. It doesn't have to be transcendent. But these are the more enlightenment or awakening or realization kind of experience. I guess I'd call them enlightenment experiences. And that's a whole big thing there. And, then there's a whole thing, what's the use of those? Besides, it's just really great. How much does it, when you have those and come out, do they contribute to a longer term shift in our being or not? It's a whole big topic about that. So I think they have a place, but most people won't have those experiences because I think for most people, it takes a lot to, in the meditation side, to get to a point where really those things can happen in the deeper samadhi. I mean, I think people, I want to be careful, I don't know your audience, but people do these with psychedelic drugs also. I don't know if these days they use the term psychedelics. That was like way back in the day. I don't know what the terms, medicines, or I don't know what people call them. Those can have a lot of power also. It's different than meditation. And there's some real perils with that to be cautious about, but they have potential. So, there's a lot of things that can open us up into these deeper realities. I don't think it has to just be meditation.
Mm-hmm. Just to reflect back, like an image I like to use for this and just see what you think. So samadhi, or these jhana states specifically, are giving a kind of a map of the mind, a map of even maybe identity at a deeper level, beingness, consciousness, and almost like music and hearing a melody, which has, the sound of a changing thing, a melody, but then there's rhythm, there's bass, there's other textures. It's almost as though these jhanas, what they're doing is it's investigating each layer of the music until you keep subtracting until you get to something like silence. And it's this deep investigation of the filaments of consciousness, of the construction of the self. And they're ever present. All these samadhi things, these jhana states, they're not something that are not present now in one's waking experience. It's just that they haven't been able to focus on it, isolate it, understand its component part, and pick it apart amongst all of the sound that's happening, the cacophony of the experience in the present moment. And this is why I'm just so excited and that we've had a pleasure of working with you today, because few people are specializing in this work, and yet I don't, as from a meditator standpoint and from a personal experiential standpoint, there seems like there was, for me, nothing more important than developing these things and understanding this. And for me, it's like being a scientist of the mind, being a scientist of the subjective experience, and it seems so poorly understood. I just wanted to reflect that. It's very hard to communicate about these things because they're experiential, not intellectual.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, and I think everything you said you expressed it very, very well. And I probably would have said very similar to what you said. And a couple of things, you didn't really ask for a comment, but maybe I'll just briefly. It's true. These deeper stages of jhana are definitely deeper stages of letting go and dropping in and simplifying down. But what comes in there, it's not just a letting go. This power of mind comes in there with the simplifying down. And one image I often use is that it's sort of like, it's sort of like an image you'll hear, like, when you go outside where I'm sitting now, I'm looking out my window and it's a beautiful, sunny, cloudless sky. All the stars are up there, but you can't see them because the sun is so bright. But when the sun goes down, something magnificent, and it's not a good analogy because the sun's magnificent too, but something subtler can reveal. And it actually turns out not to be that subtle. It's quite powerful. We can access it. Or one other image I'll use is my son and I are, not so much anymore, but are ham radio operators. And so we've got our little radio station, and we would, talk to people over in Japan and different things, just kind of a father-son thing. And it's interesting because some days the band, when you tune in, feels very clear. Some days it's very noisy. They'll say the band is noisy, and there's all this atmospheric static. The signals are there, but you can't hear it. But when the static settles down, all these signals from far away that can be weak, but you can pick them up very clearly. And it's kind of like that, where the static of our minds clears out, and then other things are revealed. And when that happens, for some people, they feel it's it's interesting when they go deep like that. Some people experience it as being very emptied out, and other people experience it, they become very filled, but not filled with the static, filled with something deeper and more beautiful. So people experience it in different ways. Some people get filled with love or with consciousness, or some it's more just an emptied out kind of a thing. So it's interesting how it manifests for each person.
It's been an absolute pleasure to connect with you here today, Richard. We'd love to share with our listeners where they can find you online. So we have note of a website, richardshankman.org, and of course, metadharma.org as well. We'd love for you to take a moment to share any projects or classes you have coming up for anyone who might like to be interested in working with you or connecting.
Yeah. Well, just a couple of things on that. I don't teach so much like I used to anymore. People ask me, and then I do things if people ask me, but I don't really put it out there anymore. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting older or whatever. So I teach less. I still have a weekly group and a few groups here and there. So I'm in a couple of retreats a year. People could go onto the metadharma.org website, and that's the best place. My richardshankman.org is there. I don't update it that much. I guess I should go on more. And so that's one way. If people want, I need to be careful that I don't overly put it out there. But, sometimes if people, hopefully wherever people are, and maybe they're working with you or they have their own local teachers, but if someone really, needs, they could contact me through those websites. And sometimes if my schedule will allow, I do talk with people about their individual practices. So I'll leave that to people on their own. I'm not looking for people to come do that, but I try to be available if people request.
So just wondering, in closing, Richard, you've had, you said, over 50 years of meditation practice. You've traversed different traditions. You seem like you're in a particular place, very, like you said, kind of open to things, really, really open to things, and really appreciate that perspective. Wondering, at this stage in your development as a teacher, as a human, as a being, what stones are left unturned? What's going on with you now that you're really interested in?
Well, I appreciate that. That's a big question. I guess what comes up for me is my practice. I'm still I don't even call it my practice. I'm just here as a human being living. But, I guess for me where I'm at is I still very much have a formal meditation practice that it's actually gotten stronger over the years, not weaker. So, and I've been pleased with that. But other times, really, my practice has gotten very, very simple. As I go about my day, anybody who's a meditator knows you don't have to go looking. You can just be more aware of what's happening in your mind naturally. And so when I'm in a place where my heart is not closed off, it's open in love, and I'm in a harmonious flow and relationship with life, I don't do anything. I just live. And when I notice that I've gotten caught in some kind of reactivity, my practice is let go. And when my heart's closed off or ill will comes up, it's open the heart. So really, my life's gotten very simple. I don't know what would happen if I stopped meditating. I haven't done the experiment. But I just keep my meditation going, and then it's just open the heart, let go. Open the heart, let go. Or in between times when I don't need to, do nothing, just live. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I don't really have any more goal now. I just do that.
Seems like the perfect sentiments to share and close on, Richard. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hang out with you, and I just will say I really appreciate the sincerity of you both, and I'm assuming people who work with you also bring that sincere intention, which I really feel like is kind of the essence of everything, is the quality of our good intention. So it's nice to hang out with you, to be with you.
Thanks so much, Richard. Our sentiment as well. Thanks for listening. You can find us at fielddynamicshealing.com.